first look at defects. What are you doing wrong? How is it happening? Find a process to fix it and find the simplest process to fix it. If you find yourself overcomplicating these processes, none of this is going to work for you.
On this Business Monday episode of Call to Leadership, we tackle the big question of when I'm going out of business, what do I do? Where is the major constraint? We're going to take a look at one area that isn't attractive. It's not even on the radar for many people. It's called waste. What am I wasting in my organization that is directly affecting my bottom line? I've invited Joe Thompson to co-host with me on this Business Monday. Sam and Travis are on vacation, and we're going to really dial this in. He's an expert in this area. I can't wait for you to listen in. I'm Dr. Nate Sala, and this is a Call to Leadership. Joe, co-pilot.
Yes,
so
sir.
Good to have you join me on this business episode of A Call to Leadership as we embark on a conversation around when I'm going out of business. It's a great, because it's real. Yes. I mean, you worked in banking services. You worked in your own company. Mm-hmm. There's a real possibility that any day could be our last. And it doesn't matter if you're a startup, if you're in the trenches, or if you're Fortune 500, 100, Fortune 50 company. There are no guarantees.
No.
And oftentimes, we look toward what's conventional in terms of how we fix the problem.
Fix the bottom line.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is we need to sell more.
Right. Need to have increase our gross price.
Yes.
Which can put us out of the market as well.
Yeah. That takes away your competitive edge. Any number of things, people try to do in order to save their business. And I think they overlook one main thing that immediately can add to their bottom line. And that is finding waste in their company.
Yeah. Yeah. Waste is it. Even the word, as you say it, I know that there's a listener like, oh, I don't want to have to deal with that, because maybe people want an easy answer. But if we can get to the root of it, and we can create systems and processes that recognize and eliminate the waste, then we may be even more competitive. We may have happier people working with us and for us, greater experiences from our customers. I mean, and a greater sense of achievement, because we know that we're acting not only more effectively but more efficiently as well.
Yes. You hit on some major words there. Recognizing, that's the first thing, because a lot of times your business is going, and maybe as the owner of the business or a manager of the business, you kind of step away from that. Processes. You have to have processes in almost any company, whether it's management or manufacturing or a service business. You need processes, and your greatest weapon in identifying waste and making processes is simplification.
Yeah, yeah.
When you complicate things, you have such a bigger margin to make mistakes. And I've seen companies who have these huge processes in place with so many redundancies, where you just need to simplify after you identify.
Yeah.
So
reminds me of a book I read on Steve Jobs, and it was all about simplicity, literally. And Jobs was obsessive about simplifying the process. In fact, the author used the word picture that Jobs would carry around his simple stick, and he would like smash everything with his simple stick, like people too. And he had this view that, especially when he came back to Apple in '97, they were on the verge of bankruptcy, 90 days from insolvency. And he said that, basically that Apple was just bloated with so much complexity, so many products. And he said that Apple was
executing well on all the wrong things. And that's like a huge statement when it comes to what we're talking about, right?
Absolutely.
So there's a ton of waste.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just, and ultimately what it did was it created an organization that went from one of the world's most beloved companies to a company that was going to be non-existent.
Mm-hmm.
So he began to cut waste. And he started with how many products that we have here, and really what do we need? What is our core product line? But of course, I know you have a set of triggers that we can identify that will help our listener to take action step by step, one by one. And as we go through these, feel free to write them down. You can also go to the site. You'll be able to pick up a template on it. And if you're in the car, don't worry about it. We'll be able to give you the tools you need if you go to Great Summit and find those tools. But in the meantime, listen in, because this is going to be game changing for your organization.
And there's no secrecy to this. Lean management came around in the 90s, and it was centered towards eliminating waste. Like, it was so important to do that they actually created lean management. So,
it's important you bring that up, because I think that, like, one of the things we think about initially in cutting waste, because we hear about it all the time, is leaning out the organization as far as personnel, right? Mm-hmm. See people on a spreadsheet, you cut people. Sometimes, right?
Sometimes that is needed.
But what happens is, I think that organizations find that that's the low-hanging fruit for them, and they go right to it.
That's the first thing they do.
Because it's easy, right? You see all this, well, that's an $80,000 salary. That's a $100,000 salary. There's 4 salaries there that we can get these other individuals to work harder. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that's not the most effective way to reduce waste.
No, it's one way, but like you said, it's low-hanging fruit. And usually one of the biggest expenses in a company is salary. So, But how much waste is there in other areas of your company that equal a person's salary? And you can often find that, and save a person's job or relocate that person to where maybe they're needed more. And we'll talk about that as we get into waste and personnel.
Yeah.
But you're right. It's usually the first place they look, and it's unfortunate. Sometimes it's needed, because I talk about redundancies, and sometimes you have the same people kind of doing the same thing, and it's not really needed. So we'll get into that a little bit.
All right. So what is our first line item that we look at when we're looking at waste?
Well, the first line item I would look at would be defects. Okay. If we're producing a product and it has so many defects out of so many times we make this product. Or if we're in a service business, how many times do we fail to perform at the level? That's a defect. If we're managing, how often is it that we do not get our employees to meet goals or do what we need them to do? Those are defects. And it's hard for businesses to admit to defects because they take it personally.
Right.
So if someone from the outside comes in, they can look and find your defects and just kind of tell you honestly, hey, look, out of 100 products, you're messing up 5 of them. That's bad. We don't want, a 5% defect that's not performing well.
So somebody listening is like, oh, I thought I was doing great.
Yeah, they think they're doing great. Well, even at 99% of efficiency, you're not doing great yet.
I love that.
That's a whole nother.
Right. We can talk Six Sigma later, podcast. Right?
Yeah.
But I love that because what it does is it ups the ante and it calls us to a higher standard. Because if we're okay with out of 100 customers satisfying 95 of them, you better believe it. Those other 5 customers are going to create 10 times the negative brand awareness
Yes.
for you.
Yeah.
And it's so much easier to satisfy 99. Let's go for the 100%. I mean, what do we have to do to get to where we have 100%, 0% defects? I mean, I know it seems like, wow. Impossible.
But what is possible is 99.997%.
Let's do it.
That is possible. And it's been proven.
And I like that because that's, was that 3 parts per million? If my math is right. Okay. That is
pretty darn good.
Pretty darn good. In fact, we might have a Great Summit shirt that says pretty darn good on the front of it, and we're going to give it away to the listener and the member of our community.
When you think about satisfying customers, even at 95%, like people would say, hey, that's grade A customer service. But what happens after 200, 300, 400 customers? Now it's 5, 10, 15, 20. It's exponentially growing. And I think Gallup don't quote me, but I think Gallup did a poll one time when someone has a good experience, they may tell one person. When someone has a bad experience, they'll tell up to 5 people. So now start to think about how that explodes.
Right.
And in today's day and age, I can get on and I can trash a company in 2 minutes.
Yeah, and people are generally more apt to give a negative review than a positive one.
Absolutely.
That's another factor, because when they're angry, they want to be heard.
It's emotional.
Yeah. And now that doesn't mean that there aren't lots of great reviews out there, but it creates more exposure to the possibility that your brand will be injured by the defect amount. Yeah.
So first look at defects. What are you doing wrong? How is it happening? Find a process to fix it, and find the simplest process to fix it. If you find yourself overcomplicating these processes, none of this is going to work for you. Okay, so simplification, we can't overstate that here.
Right.
Okay.
So let's use an example. Everyone listening at some point, I'm fairly certain, at least in the U.S., has had an experience with fast food.
Yes.
And I remember, I don't know how many years ago it was, but McDonald's used to have a triple check sticker. I don't see that sticker anymore. I could be wrong. I don't know if it's still there. Maybe the sticker came off because it's pretty rough when you have something triple checked and it's still wrong.
Well, in my experience, they have the receipt and everything with what you ordered on there, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's what's in the bag. Not the trash McDonald's.
It's just an observation. Any fast food joint, right?
Food place, like what's happening? They're pushing you through. They're trying to get you done, and they're doing muscle memory. So say you don't want ketchup on it, and this guy's put ketchup on 1,000 burgers that day. He's probably going to put ketchup on your burger. And why is that? It's because whatever process there is, whatever he's reading on the screen, and it's not translating to what he's doing, needs to be fixed.
Right. I mean, it doesn't have to be fast food. I mean, I like the food example because it's easy. But you go to an Italian restaurant, you get a to-go order, you got cheese sticks, right? And you get home, you can't wait to eat your mozzarella sticks, and guess what they forgot? The sauce, right?
Yeah.
You don't have any sauce at home. Who wants to eat mozzarella? I'm sure somebody does. But just the dipping, right? So then you're not going to go all the way back.
You lost the experience, though. That's a defect.
That's a defect.
That sauce missing is a defect. So, what process can you put in place that you never miss putting that sauce in there?
That's the key.
And people will say, well, that's impossible. It's impossible to not forget the sauce once in a while. Yes. 3 times out of 1 million, you can forget that sauce.
Right.
That's the standard.
Yeah. That's a great standard. I believe. And if you haven't listened to episodes 1 through 6, there's an episode on aiming for greatness. And it's a great, if you go back and listen after you've listened to the whole series, it's a great course on the foundations of leadership. But that's what we're talking about. So we're talking about aiming for greatness and how we lead this experience. So aim for the very best. That's where this 3 parts per million comes in. So how does an organization, a leader in an organization, somebody in management, begin this process of, first of all, recognizing
That's the main key.
the defects?
That's the main key.
Because you're not always going to hear feedback from a customer.
No. So you have to constantly be checking. You have to have a check and balance on any process that you do. That's what meetings are for.
Our meetings, right? Yeah. Nails on chalkboard.
People hate meetings, but if you have a productive one, if it's centered in focus, and there's a way to do meetings, which I think is probably another podcast. There's a way to do meetings to make them effective, that everyone leaves with a strategy on what they're going to do next. If you leave a meeting and you're not really sure what you're doing, the meeting was unsuccessful. It was just a waste of time. So there are ways to make meetings very efficient and effective.
Yeah.
And we'll get to that.
Yeah, absolutely. So and meetings don't have to always be formal. They can be informal ways to meet.
Exactly.
There's a philosophy of management by walking around is the terminology,
Mm-hmm.
but certainly having those conversations in real time as well is a fantastic way to get that initial feedback, especially from your front line. You may not be involved with the front line on a day to day, but having that kind of relationship and where it's safe to have those conversations, you've got to be the kind of leader who is approachable. Mm-hmm. And so again, another podcast altogether, but having that relationship so that your front line can share, hey, you know what, we've got a problem here. Because you might not hear it from, even if you're higher level, from middle management sometimes and others.
A great leader will not usually fix the problem. They might discover the problem, but it's usually your frontline people. It's your actual service people, your people who are manufacturing a part, for example. They usually have a better way to do it. And you have to be a listener as a good manager and a good leader. You listen to the people that are doing the work, and then they will help you with the process. If you're afraid to be the kind of leader that doesn't have the answers all the time, you will not be successful.
Yeah. And I mean, that's as far as servant leadership goes, we've got a whole series on that. And the first tenet of servant leadership is listening. I mean, it's and real listening. We can talk about listening, but undivided attention listening, active listening. And your frontline person, again, I love how you put the person manufacturing or the person assembling or the person frontline with your customer. They're the expert. Mm-hmm. They've spent many, many more hours in that very specific technical role than you would ever hope to and you would ever need to. So to have those conversations in real time is, if you're not doing it, like you said, you're missing out on the possibility to improve not only the experience, and I love to share this in ways that matter, the customer experience, but all your stakeholders. Because if it's a service relationship and there's been a defect, who's going to get that phone call? You're not getting that phone call. You're not going to get chewed out.
Right.
Your frontline employee is. And because there hasn't been a process established by you in order to mitigate that.
And the onus sometimes is put on the wrong person.
Right.
But the important thing as a leader, especially when it comes to defects, is to leave your ego out of the process. I find I've been in the corporate world for a long time. I find that the biggest thing that gets in the way of resolution of any kind is ego. Someone comes in, they have an agenda, they have a title, they want to push their agenda, whether it's the best way or not. And that is the worst way to run. Those meetings where when people bring their egos into the table, they just made my blood curdle. It's so painful to watch when you have an understanding of what's actually going on in the room, and agenda pushing based on ego will destroy your company.
Yeah.
It will kill morale. It will keep people from bringing you answers that are on the front line. You don't have to be the smartest guy in the room to be the best leader in the room.
And studies show that that's actually the optimal position, is to not be the smartest person in the room, to be someone who can lead well.
Yes.
And I think, when you talk about ego and really transpire that with humility. And so like ego, I look at ego as a wall, this huge wall between two individuals. Mm-hmm. And it keeps us from really being able to communicate and see eye to eye. It keeps us really, it keeps us from being able to progress. I mean, that's what we want to do in leadership, right? Leadership and progress go hand in hand.
Yeah.
But when you contrast that with humility and you say, I don't have all the answers, nor do I want to have all the answers. What I want to do is collaborate so that we can author a better future state together, follower and leader. And how much more attractive is that in an organization?
Yeah. And ego is easy to kill if you start to understand servant leadership. That's where it ends. I come into the meeting as a servant leader. I listen to everybody, what defects are going on, what's happening, how do we fix it? We work together, we collaborate on it. That's how things are done. That's how companies are successful.
Yeah. So starting by asking questions is a great way to discover, which is really one of the essential aspects of starting in leadership. We're discoverers, we're explorers, so that we can recognize where there are
defects. Look how simple that is.
Yeah.
Ask questions, discover, recognize, and then problem solving is the next part of that. And to be a good problem solver is to have many, many opinions. The more data you can bring in, I like to say, I don't guess. People say, was it a gut feeling? No, I don't use gut feelings, and I don't guess. I take the data, I analyze it, I make the decision based off that. Whether it's data from employees that's coming in on how something isn't working, or it's calculated data that I can quantify in a spreadsheet or something. Very important to take in as much data as you can and then make a decision based on that.
Yeah. And it is difficult. I think the other aspect of this conversation is recognizing that as far as 2020, 2021, 2022 and beyond, we're in a difficult time in terms of commerce and industry, because perhaps one of the reasons that there's more defects is because we've got shortages in people and human capital.
Personnel, yeah.
And so then what do? Well, we have conversations around setting maybe the right expectation. Maybe we can't meet as many orders and fulfill as many orders as we had been able to in the past because we had more resources. Mm-hmm. And so, again, this all goes back to recognition, right? And would you argue that it's better to fulfill less orders accurately with less defects than more and run the risk of having high number of defects?
Right. I personally would rather have less orders with no defects. But there's margins out there which companies have to meet. So maybe they got to get 1,000 products out that month, and they're willing to suck up those bad reviews or those mistakes. But the key is you can still make your agenda and it not have the defects. Because we always talk about human error. How many babies do nurses drop in a hospital? You don't hear a lot of reports on that because it's a very focused practice. So in anything you do, in any business that you're in, even if it's keeping that ketchup off the burger, that employee should be focused on what they're doing. They should want to be there and they should want to be doing it. And that is what a real leader gets their employees to do.
Yeah, Gino Wickman puts it like this in his book called Traction. It's a great read for people in business. And he talks about what he calls his GWC, which is as far as the right person for the right seat. And the GWC is really just an acronym for, do they get it? Do they get what the requirement is? Do they understand the role? And they really have the competence. Do they want it? The W. Do they actually have a desire to fill that role and do great work? Right, GWC, and then the C is the capacity to continue to grow into it, and so on. And so, if the answer is no on any one of those three, the G, the W, and the C, then the possibility for defects, possibility for reduction in the quality of the work increases. It's not that it's a deal killer, right? But the possibility for reaching the highest potential in that experience is reduced. And so it's important then to even when we're talking about defects, that's a possible defect too, is the personnel piece. Like, is this the right person, the right seat for the right role, the right time? Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, this could be an entire course, right?
Yes.
Just on
discovering defects and fixing them.
Right. Which we won't go into, but
it is a job.
It is a job, right? And maybe that role is not suited for everyone either, right? There's people who are specifically built for, they get it, want it, have the capacity to grow into it, right? Mm-hmm. This particular role. What kind of a person do you see that would be well suited for recognizing and creating processes for defects?
Well, I mean, we've talked about implementers. Mm-hmm. They definitely fall within that category. They have to be a detailed, focused person. Okay. They also have to be the type of person that can build a rapport with their workers. I mean, like you said, I always have an open door policy. Anyone who needs to speak to me about anything can come in at any time. So that's that safety that you talked about earlier. Yeah. That person has to establish that. This is a true story. I was in a meeting. We had a brand new manager come in. At the time, I was a sales and service manager. The manager comes in, he sits at the table and he says, I want everybody to look at the person to their left and to their right. So everyone's looking at their left and to their right. And he goes, by the end of the year, half of those people will be gone. I almost threw up. I mean, it was that bad. But it was another one of these ego trips. You're all doing it wrong. I'm going to come in here and show everybody how to do it right. I'm the smartest guy in the room. And it was a dismal failure. And eventually I took his job. So it was horrible. So yeah, you need a person who's good with people. A lot of implementers can struggle with their relationships with people because they're so process focused. So when interviewing your implementer, you still want someone who can interact with people and not intimidate them.
Yeah. I've heard it said like this, people don't fail, processes do. Yeah. And there's, you can certainly take any saying and break it down to where there's contradictions and whatnot, or even situations where it doesn't fit. But in general, I think the heart of the saying is that if we create processes that are 99.997% defect free, then the processes dictate the behavior.
Yes.
And the processes also create the data stream
Yes.
that helps us to continue to improve that process. I mean,
Yes.
that's what we call it.
And you really have to set up a really good onboarding and teaching. Like, people have to be trained for the job, especially in customer service. You know, you just take someone off the street, throw them in a customer service job. Most likely they're going to fail. But training is so important. And I see more and more and more often in organizations, training is going by the wayside. It's like, you know, they'll learn it as they go. And the damage that happens, I think, as they're learning on the job is you can't repair it.
No, you can't. And I think as forgiving as your end user, your customer might be, they still expect you to deliver an experience that is at least representative of what you're creating as an expectation, your promise, right, that you make. And it's interesting you bring that up, because I may have said this on another episode or two, but there's an old story about a CFO and a CEO in a budget meeting, and the CFO is complaining about the expenses for training and education. It says, you know, why are we spending all this money? What happens, you know, if we do all this training and all this education, spend all this money, and they leave? Of course, CEO, much greater vision, says, well, what if we don't and they stay?
Right. Exactly.
So yeah, so it's essential. And if you haven't created that budget, I mean, I look at training and education as a utility. You know, I mean, you got to keep the lights on. Right? You got to have phones. At least in most organizations, I don't know if the IRS has them. They say they do, but they don't answer them very much. No, they're understaffed too. But it's another great example about defects, right? Mm-hmm. Because I think I read somewhere that only 40%, at least as of 2022, of phone calls made to the Internal Revenue Service are answered by a live person. And you can imagine that somebody gets a letter, you get a letter in the mail, and it says Internal Revenue Service on the front. Okay, so first of all,
you're scared.
There's stress. Like, oh my goodness, you open the letter and it's a bill. It says something along the lines of, we found an error on your tax return, or perhaps an employer reported a different amount, or any number of issues. You owe $4,378.22. And hello. So your heart sinks. There's a phone number at the top right. Oh, no problem. I'll call them. We'll get this all straightened out. 2 hours later, and the jingle's going, and and then it like changes the song. You can usually tell when they're about to pick up because the song changes, you know, dun, 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 dun. And then it hangs up.
Yes.
No. Or the person starts talking. This is agent, 457326. Click. You're like, that's a defect.
Yes. That's huge. Big defect.
Yeah. Part of the problem is you can't go and work with another company. Mm-hmm. Like, there's no competition.
Yeah.
Or you can't go pay your taxes to a competitor.
And unfortunately, a lot of government-ran businesses have major defects that just go unchecked.
And I think that's the part of the beauty of private enterprise, is that the commerce.
They care.
Well, yeah. They care.
He wants to keep his business.
I mean, there's a mutual benefit.
Yes.
And a mutual value proposition. And so back to, the original opening. So the IRS is only one example. Of course, private enterprise struggles as well. But the difference is that when you are private enterprise, you have a vested interest in the customer for many more reasons than even their satisfaction. You'll go out of business if you don't create the experience that does what that Drucker's model for. He said, business is, the reason for a business to exist is to create and satisfy a customer. And with excessive waste, even 5 parts per 100 that can stifle that justification for existence. Yeah. And that's just one.
That's just one. Defects. That's one identifiable waste.
Yeah. So what we'll do is we'll keep these moving on the next episode of A Call to Leadership. If you are in a place to where you have defects, and we all do, we're going to provide ways for you to begin to mitigate those. Just head to the site. We're going to have a template for you. You can follow some operational procedures to begin to work toward 3 parts per million Six Sigma.
Yeah, it's Six Sigma level.
Yeah. I had to say it that way because I just feel like it's, Six Sigma. It's some martial arts stuff.
Yeah.
It does sound like martial arts, doesn't it? Six Sigma.
It does.
Yeah.
And a lot of the philosophy is from Japanese business practices. So.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Is that one of the reasons why you were drawn to it?
Maybe. Yeah.
Okinawan style. I'm terrible. I shouldn't even do that. That's probably really dishonoring to somebody.
Yeah, without knowing our martial art background.
It's true. Yeah. So Joe and I come from a martial arts background. That's it's kind of how we met through our sensei. Yeah. And we used to have lots of fun. You being 100 pounds stronger than me.
You were going to say heavier.
I was not going to say heavier. I was close. Do you remember when we used to take punches at each other and you would tell me to punch you and I would say, well, give me 30%, then give me 50 and we can keep going up from there. I think I probably stopped at about 70, but pack a punch, brother.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, my friend, thank you for joining me on this episode of A Call to Leadership. If you've been listening, you've probably heard me talk about our accounting and advisory business. And this show was actually born out of that business, those relationships. I found that entrepreneurs and professionals were missing aspects of their leadership that fed into their bottom line and helped their businesses be successful. If you're in that place where you feel, oh my goodness, my tax person or my accountant, I can't find them, or maybe the service wasn't up to my expectations, do not despair. I'll leave how you can find us in the show notes.